Welcome to Late Night Story. When the world goes silent and shadows stretch longer, some stories awaken, whispered only to those still awake. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and let me guide you through the quiet hours. If you're listening alone, you're exactly where you need to be. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, don't forget to subscribe before you drift too far into the dark.
Story 1. My family insists there's a wall where I see a door. I'm starting to think they're not lying. They're just protecting me. Alright, I don't know where else to put this. A friend told me about this place. Said you guys are more open-minded than most. I need to get this out, to write it all down, because I feel like I'm either going insane or I'm in some kind of serious trouble. Maybe both. It started, or I should say, I first noticed it when I was about 16. We lived in the same apartment my whole life. An old pre-war building. The kind with thick walls, high ceilings, and a layout that felt like it was designed by someone who hated straight lines. My room was at the end of a long, narrow hallway that branched off from the main living area. It was always the darkest part of the apartment. The part where the overhead light fixture never seemed to be bright enough. At the very end of this hallway, past my bedroom door on the left and the small linen closet on the right, was a solid wall, or what was supposed to be a solid wall. Except for me, it wasn't. For me, there was a door. It wasn't ornate or spooky. It was the opposite, which was almost worse. It was a simple, flat-paneled wooden door, painted the same shade of landlord special off-white as everything else. But it was wrong. The frame was just a little too thin, the brass doorknob a little too tarnished compared to the others. It didn't belong. I knew, with the kind of deep, instinctual certainty you can't explain, that if I measured the building's exterior and then my family's apartment, there would be a chunk of space unaccounted for, a room-sized chunk. The first time I tried to open it, I was just curious. I'd walk down the hall to go to my room and just stopped in front of it. My hand reached out, my fingers wrapping around the cool, smooth metal of the knob. It was real. It felt solid under my palm. Before I could turn it, my mom's voice cut through the quiet from the kitchen. "Honey, dinner's almost ready. What are you doing back there?" "Just coming." I called back, my hand still on the knob. I heard her footsteps, the soft shuffle of her slippers on the hardwood floor. She came around the corner, and her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. It was a look of immense, profound weariness. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice soft. "I was just wondering what's in here," I said, gesturing to the door. "I don't think I've ever seen it open." She blinked slowly. "Seen what opened, sweetie?" "This door." She followed my gaze, her eyes landing on the space my hand was occupying. She looked at me, then at the wall, then back at me. Her expression was one of pain confusion, the kind you'd give a beloved pet that had suddenly forgotten how to walk. "You're standing in front of the wall," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Come on, let's eat. You must be tired." She didn't wait for me to respond. She just turned and walked away. I stood there for a moment, my hand hovering in the air where the doorknob had been. I looked back. It was still there. The door, the frame, the knob. I could see the faint hairline cracks in the paint. I reached out again, and my fingers brushed against cold, textured plaster. The door was gone. It was only a wall. I shook my head, a cold sweat breaking out on my neck. I felt dizzy. I must have imagined it. Stress from school, maybe. I went to the kitchen and ate dinner, and nobody mentioned it again. But it kept happening. I'd be walking down the hall, and there would be. I'd catch a glimpse of it from the corner of my eye. Sometimes I'd stop and stare, trying to will it to stay, to prove I wasn't losing my mind. But the moment I tried to focus, to really commit to interacting with it, someone would intervene. My younger sister was the most direct. I was standing there one afternoon, just looking at it, my heart pounding in my chest. She came barreling down the hall, phone in hand. "What's your problem?" she asked, not even looking up. What do you mean? You're always doing this. Standing here like a creep, staring at the wall. It's weird. It's not a wall, I said, my voice barely a whisper. It's a door. She finally looked up from her screen, an expression of genuine annoyance on her face. Okay, whatever. You're blocking the hall. She pushed past me, her shoulder bumping mine, and disappeared into her room. I looked back. The door was there, solid and silent. My dad was the worst, though. His reaction wasn't confusion like my mom's or annoyance like my sister's. It was a deep, quiet anger, an anger that felt like it was covering up something else. One night, I couldn't sleep. The apartment was silent. Everyone was in bed. I crept out of my room and down the hall. The moonlight from the living room window barely reached back here, casting long, distorted shadows. And in the gloom, the door seemed more real than ever. I could almost smell the dust and stale air that I imagined behind it. I took a deep breath and reached for the knob. My fingers were an inch away when his voice came from the darkness behind me. Don't. I spun around. My dad was standing at the other end of the hall, just a silhouette against the faint light. I couldn't see his face. I was just... Go back to bed, he said. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion, but it carried a weight that made my blood run cold. There is nothing there for you. But I see it. I pleaded, my voice cracking. Dad, there's a door here. There is a wall, he said, and he took a step forward. You're tired. Your mind is playing tricks on you. Go to sleep? Now. I didn't argue. There was something in his tone that told me this was not a discussion. I scurried back to my room and lay in bed, my body trembling. I had never seen him like that. It wasn't just a father telling his son to go to bed. It felt like a guard warning a prisoner away from the fence. That's when I started hearing the sounds. At first, it was so faint I thought it was the pipes or the neighbors upstairs. A soft scratching, like a mouse behind plaster. But it was always coming from the same spot, from behind the door. Then, the scratching became more frantic, more intentional, like fingernails dragging down a wooden surface. I'd lie awake at night, my ear pressing my own bedroom wall, trying to make sense of it. I told myself it was rats, big ones, but I knew it wasn't. One evening, while I was doing homework, I heard it, a voice. It was muffled, indistinct, but it was unmistakably human. A cry, a short, desperate sob that was cut off abruptly. I shot out of my chair and ran into the hall. The door was there, stark and white under the dim light. I pressed my ear against it, my whole body shaking. Silence. Did you hear that? I yelled, my voice echoing the apartment. My mom appeared in the living room, a book in her hand. Hear what, honey? You shouted. A cry. It came from in here. I slapped my hand against the flat surface of the door. She sighed, that same tired look on her face. There's no in here. It's Mr. Henderson's apartment on the other side of that wall. He's a 90-year-old man. Maybe he had the television on. It didn't sound like a TV, I insisted. It sounded like someone was hurt. My dad came and stood next to her. He looked past me at the wall, and his jaw was tight. Knock it off, he said, his voice low. You're scaring your mother. I'm not trying to scare anyone. I'm telling you what I heard. The sounds became more frequent after that. The pleading was clearer. Help me, it would whisper, a thin, reedy voice that seemed to seep through the wood. Please, it's so dark in here. Sometimes it was a man's voice, sometimes a woman's. Sometimes it sounded like a child. I was the only one who heard it. I tried to record on my phone, but all I ever got was static and the low hum of the building. I was becoming a ghost in my own home. I lost weight. I stopped talking much at dinner. I spent most of my time in my room, with headphones on, trying to block out the whispers from the end of the hall. My family started treating me like I was made of glass. They spoke in soft, placating tones. My mom would leave snacks outside my door. My sister stopped making fun of me and just avoided me. They were walking on eggshells, and it was suffocating. They thought I was going crazy. I was starting to believe them. The breaking point came a few years later, when I was home for my first year of college. I thought maybe getting away would have fixed it, that the distance would have reset my brain. But the moment I walked down that hallway, it was there, the door. It was like it had been waiting for me. And that night, the sounds were worse than ever. It wasn't just whispers anymore. It was screaming, a high, thin shriek of pure terror that went on and on. I burst out of my room, my hands over my ears. Can't you hear that? For God's sake, how can you not hear that? My parents were in the living room watching TV. The sound from the television was completely drowned out by the screaming in my head. My dad stood up, his face pale. My mom was crying silently. Make it stop. I begged him, tears streaming down my face. Dad, please, you have to do something. He walked over to me, his steps heavy. He put his hands on my shoulders, his grip like iron. He looked me straight in the eyes, and his own were filled with a terrible, familiar pain. Listen to me, he said, his voice ragged. You have to be strong. You have to ignore it. Just block it out. I can't. It's so loud. And then he said the words that changed everything. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, his eyes wild with a desperation I'd never seen before. I know, he gritted out. It's louder for you than it was for your grandfather. The screaming in my head stopped. The world went silent. What? I breathed. He realized what he'd said. The strength went out of his arms, and he stumbled back, his face ashen. I didn't mean... What did you mean? I demanded, following him as he backed away. What was it like for Grandpa? My mom was openly sobbing now. Don't, she begged my dad. Please don't. Grandpa died of a heart attack. I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. That's what you always told me. My dad wouldn't look at me. He just stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped into defeat. That's the simple version. It was a floodgate opening. I hounded him for days. I refused to let it go. That one sentence had validated my entire experience. I wasn't crazy. This was real. This was something that had happened before. Finally, he broke. He led me to the small, dusty storage closet at the back of the apartment, a place filled with old tax records and broken appliances. From the very back, under a pile of moth-eaten blankets, he pulled out a small wooden footlocker. Your grandmother gave this to me after he died, he said, his voice hollow. She told me to burn it. I never could. Inside was a collection of my grandfather's things. Old photos, a service medal, some letters, and at the bottom, a thin leather-bound journal. It belonged to his older brother, my great-uncle, a man no one ever spoke about. I took the journal to my room and opened it. The first few pages were dated from just after the Second World War. He wrote about coming home, about trying to find a job, about living with his parents and his younger brother, my grandfather, in this very apartment. His early entries were normal. He talked about the city, about a girl he liked, about his frustration with his family. Then the tone started to shift. He mentioned the hallway. October 12th. There's a strange draft at the end of the hall, past my brother's room. Mother says it's just the old building settling, but it feels specific. It's coming from a door I don't remember being there before. It's plain white. It doesn't seem to lead anywhere according to the building plans Father keeps in his study. My blood turned to ice. I kept reading. October 29th. I tried to open the door today. My brother stopped me. He laughed and asked why I was trying to walk through a wall. When I looked again, he was right. There was only plaster. But I know what I saw. I'm not imagining it. He's young. He doesn't pay attention. But I saw it. November 15th. The sounds have started. A scratching. I thought it was a rat, but it's too rhythmic. And last night, a voice. A woman, I think, crying for help. I asked Father if he heard it, and he became enraged. He told me I was not to go down that end of the hall again. He looked frightened. The entries grew more erratic. His handwriting, once neat and controlled, became a frantic scrawl. He described the same whispers, the same pleas for help. He wrote about his family's denial, their insistence that he was ill, that the war had done something to his mind. December 7th. They think I am mad. They talk about me when they think I cannot hear. They want to send me away, but I am not mad. There is someone trapped in that room. I hear them every night. They beg me to let them out. How can my own family be so cruel as to leave someone to suffer like that? They are the mad ones, not I. December 21st. It is so loud now. The screaming. It never stops. I cannot eat. I cannot sleep. My brother, my own brother, looks at me with pity. He does not hear. He does not understand. Only I can help them. The knob is so cold. But I know what I must do. The final entry was just a few words, scrawled so hard the pen had torn the page. December 23rd. I have to let them out. Below that, there was a clipping from a newspaper, yellowed and brittle, tucked into the back cover of the journal. It was a short article. It stated that my great-uncle had been committed to a state asylum after a violent psychotic episode in which he had attacked a wall in his family's apartment with a hammer, claiming he was freeing the prisoners. He died in that asylum 30 years later. I closed the journal, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I walked out into the living room, holding it like it was a bomb. My father was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands. My mother was next to him, her arm around his shoulders. They looked up as I entered. They already knew. It's not a sickness, I said, my voice dead. Is it? My father finally looked at me, his face a mask of grief. No, he said, it's worse. It's a thing, a burden. It attaches to one person in our family, each generation. It seems to choose the sons. It chose my uncle. It chose my father. And now it's chosen you. He told me everything. He said his father, my grandfather, had seen the door too, heard the sounds. But after seeing what happened to his brother, he chose a different path. He spent his entire life ignoring it. He drank heavily. He was a cold, distant man. He lived in a constant state of managed terror, fighting a battle no one else could see. The stress, my dad said, is what really killed him, not a heart attack. A lifetime of listening to the screams behind the door had just worn his body out. It's a parasite, my dad whispered, his eyes pleading with me. It feeds on attention. The more you focus on it, the more you listen, the stronger it gets, the louder it gets. Your great-uncle tried to fight it, to open the door. It consumed him. Your grandfather ignored it, and it poisoned him from the inside out. I've been lucky. It skipped me. I've never seen it, never heard it. All I could do was watch my father suffer and pray it wouldn't come for my son. He broke down then, a lifetime of fear and guilt pouring out of him. You have to be stronger than them, he sobbed. You have to live your life so fully, so loudly that you drown it out. You have to forget that hallway even exists. Please, you have to be the one to starve it, to let it die. Just live your life and don't look back. I listened to all of it. I heard his words. I saw his tears. And a part of me, the logical, educated part, rejected it all. A curse? A generational parasite? It sounded like something from a fantasy novel. The more plausible explanation was so much simpler, and in its own way, sadder. My great-uncle had a severe mental illness. The trauma of it created a shared delusion, a piece of family folklore passed down through fear and suggestion. My grandfather likely had his own struggles, and my dad's anxiety manifested as his protective, frantic denial. And me, I was just the next in a line of men with a genetic predisposition to schizophrenia. That's what I chose to believe. It was the only sane option. I told them I needed to get away, not from them, but from the apartment, from the environment. I needed a fresh start, a place with no history, no dark hallways. My dad argued, begging to stay where he could help, but I knew I couldn't. Staying felt like accepting the curse was real. Leaving felt like choosing sanity. I got a good job in a city 1,000 miles away. The move was a blur of boxes and goodbyes. The last time I saw my dad, he hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. Be strong, he whispered in my ear. Don't listen. My new apartment is nothing like my old one. It's a modern high-rise. Clean lines, lots of natural light, brand new everything. For the first 2 months, it was perfect. It was quiet, blissfully, wonderfully quiet. I slept through the night for the first time in years. I was starting to feel normal. I was convinced I had made the right choice. I had escaped the family madness. Last night, I finished unpacking the last of my boxes. I'd set up my office in the second bedroom. It was late, and I was walking from the office to the kitchen to get a glass of water. The main living area is open plan, but there's a short hallway that leads to the master bedroom and bathroom. It's a small, functional space, a blank canvas, and at the end of it, where there is supposed to be a solid, featureless wall, there's a door. I stopped dead, the empty glass slipping from my hand and shattering on the floor. It's the same door, the exact same one, plain, flat panel, painted a slightly too bright shade of white that doesn't quite match the rest of the trim. The same tarnished brass knob. It wasn't the apartment. It was never the apartment. It's me. I brought it with me. I stood there for what felt like hours, my bare feet just inches from the broken glass, my eyes fixed on the impossible door. My dad's words echoed in my head. It attaches to one person. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my dad. A text message. Just checking in. Everything okay? I couldn't answer. I couldn't move. Slowly, shakily, I took a step forward. And another. I stood before it. The impossible architecture of my personal hell. I could feel a faint, cold draft seeping from under it. My dad begged me to be strong, to ignore it, to live my life and starve it out. My great uncle's diary proved the cost of trying to fight it, but they never considered a third option. Not fighting it, not ignoring it, accepting it. I leaned forward, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pressed my ear to the smooth, cool wood. At first, there was only silence. A deep, profound quiet that was more unnerving than any scream. I held my breath, listening, and then I heard it, a faint scratching, and a whisper, so close it felt like it was on the other side of my own skin. Help me? My father begged me to be strong enough to ignore it. My grandfather was strong enough to ignore it, and it broke him. My great uncle was strong enough to fight it, and it destroyed him. I don't know if I'm strong. All I know is that for the first time in my life, there's no one here to tell me to stop. Story 2. Someone's been tapping on my window at night and leaving candy wrappers. I will never forget the first time it happened. It's the reason why I don't feel safe sleeping at night anymore. Let me start at the beginning. It was your normal Monday evening. I was staying up later than usual due to the school holidays, a luxury I rarely get to enjoy anymore. It was 2 a.m. when I finally decided to turn in for the night. I would have stayed up later if it weren't for the fact that I was going shopping the next day. Well, technically in a couple of hours. I turned off the lights and nestled into bed. That's when I heard it. A soft tapping sound against my window. Heart pounding. I immediately opened the blinds, but there was nothing. It was probably some kind of bug hitting the window. I pulled the blankets over me and went to sleep without a second thought. I woke up to the sun filtering through the blinds. I groaned. I opened the blinds. A chill went down my spine. There were smudges of fingerprints on the glass, and on the ground was a candy wrapper. My mind started racing. Was there actually someone outside my window at 2 a.m. in the morning? I went outside to investigate. The wind had blown the wrapper away, but I couldn't find anything else suspicious. Thankfully, I picked up the wrapper to have a closer look. It was a cherry-ripe wrapper, and there was still some chocolate sticking to it. I pocketed it, and I went to investigate the window. The fingerprints were slightly brown, probably from the chocolate, and there was a dark smear close to the top of the window. There was nothing else. I decided to check to see if I accidentally left the side gate open yesterday. Nope, it was still locked. Someone must have jumped the fence last night. But why? I tried not to jump to any conclusions about the possibility of someone being there last night. I thought that maybe the smudges were actually dirt and that the wind had blown the cherry-ripe wrapper from next door. But I think I was just trying to make myself feel a little less uneasy. Even so, I still felt pretty creeped out for the rest of the day. I was exhausted by the time I got to bed that day. I didn't really have the energy to stay up this time. so I went to sleep almost immediately. I jolted up. Something was tapping against the window again. A chill went down my spine, and I threw the blinds open once again. Nothing. There was nothing. I didn't get much sleep for the rest of the night. Not when my mind was swimming with possibilities. In the morning, I didn't hesitate to open the blinds. My stomach dropped. The fingerprints were all over the window. And just like yesterday, there was also another cherry ripe wrapper, but this time, it was on top of the outside windowsill. I immediately bolted outside. My heart was pounding. I examined the wrapper that was left on the sill, and it was exactly the same as the one from the other day. The fingerprints were also similar to the one from yesterday, but something was different about them. I have no idea if my eyes were playing tricks on me, or if it was the sun, but I swear some of the fingerprints had a red tinge to them. I quickly checked the side gate just in case, but it was locked, just like how I left it. I decided to go out to the shops again to buy a security camera. And I know it might seem like I'm being paranoid about this, but at this point, it's better to be safe than sorry. I set the camera up outside my window, and I made sure that it was out of sight. I also installed the app that came with the camera, so I could check the footage the next morning. Despite my growing anxiety, I managed to fall into a deep sleep that night. Maybe it was because I felt safer knowing the security camera was there, knowing that I might find out what was really happening. My eyes flew open and I jolted up. My blood ran cold. There was a sharp scratching sound against the window. It was like fingernails against a chalkboard, but 100 times worse. I winced in discomfort at the sound and opened the blinds yet again. There was nothing. Again, this is getting ridiculous, I thought to myself. I groaned in frustration and fell back on my bed. As I attempted to fall back to sleep, I wondered what had made that sound. I tried not to dwell on it, because the more I thought about it, the heavier the pit in my stomach became. I groggily woke up the next day. I definitely didn't sleep well last night. I nervously opened the blinds. Again, my face paled, and the pit in my stomach grew heavier than ever before. I felt like I was going to be sick. There were now small scratches all over the window, and of course, there was also the brown fingerprint smudges, as well as the cherry ripe wrapper. Before I went outside, I wanted to check the security camera footage. My eyes widened when I saw the footage. It was static. I bolted outside as quickly as I could. I stopped still once I came to the window, and bile rose in my throat. There was something shiny hidden below the window. It was a pocket knife, and right next to the knife, my newly brought security camera laid in shambles. That bastard. I mumbled to myself as I picked up the pieces and the knife. I immediately jumped back in horror. There were specks of blood on the blade. I genuinely felt like I was going to throw up. I started to freak out. Who the hell was doing this? I was starting to spiral. This is getting too much now. I pocketed the knife, the candy wrapper, and the security, and I threw them into the trash. I came back to the window to investigate further. I hesitantly moved closer to the window. The fingerprints had a red tinge now, and some scratches as well. I decided to finally call the police. I didn't want to call them before because I didn't want them to think I was overreacting, but enough is enough. They told me to call them as soon as I heard any tapping or scratching during the night. And they also mentioned that I shouldn't open my blinds if I heard these sounds again. The rest of the day felt like a blur. All I could focus on were the fingerprints, the knife, and of course the cherry ripe wrapper. Finally, night came and it was time to sleep. Honestly, I was not looking forward to it. But what else could I do at this point? I can't remember how long it took me to fall asleep that night, but somehow I eventually did. My eyes bolted open and my heart was pounding. Once again, someone was tapping on the window. I didn't open the blinds this time. Instead, I immediately called the police, trying to be as quiet as I possibly could just in case. Honestly, I don't think I've ever felt that anxious as I did at that moment. I didn't want to mess this up. I just wanted it to be over. Luckily, it only took 5 minutes for the police to arrive, and in that time, the tapping sound had stopped, and I was so sure that whoever was doing this had got away. But I was very wrong. At around 3 a.m., the police arrived, and shortly after, they found an unconscious man outside my bedroom window. He wasn't in the best shape, and it seemed like he was probably on drugs or under the influence of alcohol, probably a mix of both. And he also looked homeless. But the most interesting thing of all was that he had a cherry ripe wrapper in his pocket. The police took him into custody, and that was that. I haven't heard any tapping or scratching during the night after he was taken away, but I still had a lot of trouble sleeping at night. I still felt somewhat uneasy. I was eventually prescribed some sleep medication, and I've been sleeping well ever since. Well, that is until a couple days ago. One morning, I was greeted by the sun filtering through my blinds. Today was going to be a good day. I thought to myself as I went to go open them. My heart stopped right in the middle of the window. There was a message smeared onto the glass made up of bloody fingerprints. My face paled as I read it. I see you. Story 3. I didn't see the sky for 10 years. It's been 15 years since I saw the sky for the first time in a decade. And I still have trouble sleeping without a nightlight. Not because I'm afraid of the dark. I lived in the dark for a long time. But because when the lights are out, my sense of scale disappears. I can't tell if the walls are 10 feet away or 10 inches. I can't tell if the door is locked. My name is June. I am 43 years old. I work a data entry job from home. I order my groceries online. I don't have friends and my family is all dead. If you were to Google my name, which I won't give you, you wouldn't find anything. When I was found in 2010, I begged the police and the lawyers to keep my name out of the papers. I was a girl in the cellar. A Jane Doe victim in a mid-sized town that wanted to forget a monster lived among them. They respected my privacy, mostly because my father, the man who put me there, was a respected deacon in our community. The scandal was bad enough without my face plastered on the news. But keeping it inside has rotted me. It's a different kind of captivity. So, I'm going to tell you what happened. I need to put this somewhere where people will believe me. The year was 2000. We survived the Y2K panic. The world didn't end, but mine was about to. I was 18, fresh out of high school, and preparing for college in the fall. I was also in love. Her name was Maya. In the year 2000 in my town, girls didn't kiss girls. Not without consequences. My father was a hard man. Silent. Stoic. The kind of man who believed obedience was the highest form of love. He caught us on a Tuesday. Maya had walked me home, and we were standing by the side of the garage, hidden by the rhododendrons. We kissed. It wasn't anything tawdry. It was sweet, clumsy, and terrified. The back door opened. My father didn't yell. That was the scariest thing about him. He never yelled. He just stared. He looked at Maya, then at me, with eyes like flat, gray stones. He told Maya to go home. Then he told me to go to my room. He didn't speak to me for 3 days. I thought he was just icing me out. I thought the punishment was the silence. I was wrong. On Friday afternoon, he knocked on my bedroom door. "June," he said. His voice was calm. "I need help moving the chest freezer in the basement shelter." My father was a paranoid man. He had spent the late 90s building a storm shelter behind a false wall in the basement. It was his project for when the computers crashed and society collapsed. I followed him down the wooden stairs, past the furnace, to the shelving unit that swung outward on heavy hinges. "It's heavy," he said, gesturing inside. "Just get on the other side and push." I walked in. The room was concrete, cold, smelling of dried dust and canned vegetables. I turned to grab the corner of the freezer. I heard the heavy thud of the steel door, followed by the metallic clack, clack, clack of the 3 deadbolts engaging. "Dad." I called out. "Dad." Stop joking. The lights flickered once, then buzzed steady. I ran to the door. I pounded on it. I screamed until my throat tasted like blood. I kicked until my toes were bruised violet. He didn't answer. He didn't answer that day, or the next. That room became my entire universe for 3,650 days. The first few months were a blur of hysteria and denial. I kept thinking it was a test. Repent, I thought. If I repent, he'll let me out. I screamed apologies at the ceiling. I promised I would never touch a girl again. I promised I'd go to church every day. The room was soundproof. He'd built it well. The layout was stark. Initially, it was about 12 feet by 12 feet. There was a cot with a thin mattress, a bucket for waste, later replaced, which I'll get to, a sink with cold running water, and crates of non-perishable food intended for the apocalypse. My father would visit, but not to talk. A slot in the bottom of the door, something he must have installed specially, would slide open. A tray would slide in, usually a sandwich or leftovers from a dinner I could smell cooking 2 floors above. Then the tray would slide back out. I tried to catch his fingers once. I shoved my hand through the slot, clawing for him. He didn't recoil. He just calmly took a heavy wooden dowel and shoved it against my hand until I pulled back in pain. He never spoke. It was as if speaking to me would acknowledge that he was doing something monstrous. If he stayed silent, he was just a force of nature, a jailer ordained by God. The boredom was not immediate. Fear occupied me for the first year, but around the second year, the geography of the room changed. This is the part that haunts me the most, the physical alteration of my reality. I had been planning. I had been scratching at the grout of the concrete blocks behind the supply crates with a spoon handle I'd stolen from a tray. It was pathetic, really. I'd made maybe a quarter-inch of progress. Then came the needles. One morning, my food tray had a glass of milk. It tasted sweet, almost chalky. I was so thirsty I didn't care. 20 minutes later, the room started to spin. My limbs felt like lead. I crawled to the cot, darkness swallowing me. When I woke up, I don't know how much time had passed. My head felt like it had been split open with an axe. My mouth was dry as sand. I sat up and froze. The room was different. The wall I had been scratching at was gone. The room had extended back another 10 feet. In the new space, he had installed a small, cramped bathroom module, a toilet, and a tiny stall shower, plumbed into the house's main line. But that wasn't the worst part. In the corners of the ceiling, tiny black domes blinked red. Cameras. And the door was no longer just a steel-reinforced fire door. He had welded a secondary bar across the front, controlled electronically. I could hear the maglock hum. I threw up. He had drugged me. He had come in here, carried my unconscious body around, worked around me, possibly for days, knocked down a wall, did plumbing work, and seal me back up. It was the ultimate violation. It proved that I was nothing more than a piece of furniture to him. He wasn't afraid of me escaping. He was just storing me. That was when I stopped trying to dig out. If he could drug me, if he could watch me 24/7, there was no blind spot. Around year 3, a television appeared. I woke up from another drug slumber. He did this periodically to do maintenance or clean. To find a small 20-inch box TV on a stand bolted to the floor. It was hooked up to a basic cable line and a DVD player. This was my window. This was how I watched my 20s pass me by. I watched the Twin Towers fall in September 2001, before I even had the TV, hearing the muffled sounds of news from the upstairs floorboards, confused and terrified. But with the TV, I saw the aftermath. I saw the invasion of Iraq. I saw the world shifting, becoming harder, angrier. I watched technology explode. Flip phones turned into Blackberries, then into iPhones. I watched pop culture leave me behind. I developed a routine. I had to, or I would have smashed my head against the cinder blocks. Wake up, shower, 3 minutes of hot water, timed. Eat the granola or toast provided through the slot. Exercise, calisthenics, pacing. Then the movies. My father would slide DVDs through the slot. He never asked what I wanted. He just gave me things from his own collection, or things he found in the bargain bin. Westerns, old monochromatic classics, Casablanca, The Searchers, then, oddly, cheap romantic comedies, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. I watched them until the disc skipped. I memorized every line. I learned to mimic the accents. I held conversations with imaginary versions of Matthew McConaughey or Judy Garland. It wasn't about entertainment. It was about hearing human voices that weren't screaming. By year 5, I had acclimated. It is a sickening thing to admit, But the human mind is adaptable. The room was my world. The world outside was a fiction on the screen. I stopped hating my father around year 6. Hate takes too much energy. It burns calories you need to survive. I started to view him as a weather pattern. He was a provider. When the slot opened, it rained food. When the lights went out, it was night. I projected emotions onto his silence. Maybe he's sorry. I'd think, chewing on a stale bagel. Maybe he's afraid to let me out because he knows he'd go to prison. He's trapped too. I was delusional, of course. He wasn't trapped. He was living upstairs, probably sitting in his recliner, watching the same football games I watched, drinking beer, sleeping in a bed with sheets that smelled like fresh air. The boredom was the true torture. People think of torture as physical pain, whips and chains. But absolute, unyielding boredom is worse. It eats your memories. I started forgetting what fresh grass smelled like. I forgot the specific shade of Maya's eyes. I forgot how cold wind felt on a wet cheek. My memories of the outside world became pixelated, replaced by the scenes from the movies. I started talking to the cameras. Good morning, I'd say to the lens and corner. Did you sleep well? I tossed and turned. The mattress is lumpy. I knew he was watching. Sometimes, if I asked for something specific, like Advil for a headache or feminine hygiene products, they would appear in the slot a few hours later. He was listening. That was our intimacy. My needs, his provision. No words. By 2008, the recession hit. I watched families losing their homes on the news. I looked around my concrete box, rent-free, fed daily, and felt a grotesque spike of gratitude. At least I'm safe, I told myself. The world out there is scary. Here, nothing changes. That was Stockholm Syndrome, full-blown and malignant. In late 2009, I noticed a change. Not in the room, but in the routine. The food tray started coming later. The quality of the food dropped. Sometimes it was just a can of soup and a spoon, unheated, through the slot. I caught a glimpse of his hand one day. It was shaking. The skin was liver-spotted and paper-thin. He was getting old. Panic set in. Not hope. Panic. If he dies, I realized I die. Nobody knew about the room. He built it himself. The door was disguised behind a shelving unit, filled with paint cans and old tools. If he had a heart attack in the kitchen, he would rot upstairs, and I would starve to death downstairs. 10 feet of earth and concrete between me and salvation. I started hoarding food. I saved crackers, wrappers, half bottles of water. I hid them under the loose corner of the mattress. My escape didn't come from a grand plan. It didn't come from me overpowering him. It came, as everything in my life did, with silence. It was a Tuesday in August 2010. Lunch didn't come. I waited. I paced. I talked to the camera. I'm hungry, I said. Please. Nothing. Dinner time passed. The news came on at 6 p.m. I watched it, stomach growling. The next morning, no breakfast. I screamed. I hadn't screamed in 5 years. Dad, Dad, please. My voice cracked. It was weak from disuse. I drank water from the tap to soothe my throat and screamed again. By the third day, the terror was a physical weight. The air in the room was getting stale. The ventilation system seemed to be running on low power or had shut off. I banged the metal-heavy chair against the door for hours until my hands blistered. He's dead, I thought. He's dead. And I am in my tomb. I lay on the floor, watching the crack of light under the door. I hallucinated. I thought I saw Maya standing by the bathroom, smiling at me. Then, around the fourth day, I had lost exact count. I heard a sound. It wasn't a slot opening. It was a heavy boom from upstairs, like a door being kicked in. Then voices, heavy boots, a dog barking. I scrambled to the door. I didn't have the strength to bang the chair anymore. I pressed my face to the cold steel. I'm here. I shrieked. Down here. Basement. Shelves. I didn't know if they could hear me. Soundproofing works both ways. I heard the thudding of boots on the stairs. I heard men talking. Clear down here, a deep voice said. Looks like just storage. No. I screamed. I'm behind the shelves. Push the shelves. I picked up the heavy chair with the last of my adrenaline and smashed it against the door. Clang. Silence outside. Did you hear that? The voice said. Clang. It came from the wall. I heard the scraping of the shelving unit being dragged across the concrete. Then a voice, muffled but close. Hello? Is someone back there? Help me! I sobbed. My name is June. Please. Jesus Christ, the voice whispered. Then came the tools. The screech of a circular saw biting into metal, the sparks flying. It took them an hour to cut through the heavy locks and the steel bar my father had welded. When the door finally swung open, the light from their flashlights was blinding. It felt like fire in my eyes. I covered my face, curling into a ball on the floor. A police officer, a woman, touched my shoulder. It's okay, she said. Her voice was trembling. You're okay now. I learned the truth a few days later from a hospital bed. Hooked up to IVs and wearing sunglasses because the room lights hurt too much. My father had suffered a massive stroke in the kitchen. He had dropped dead instantly. He lay there for 3 days before a neighbor, noticing his mail piling up and the lawn unmowed. He was meticulous about the lawn. Called for a wellness check. They found him. They cleared the house. They were about to leave when I banged the chair. 10 years. The adjustment it wasn't like in the movies. There was no joyous montage. I was 30 pounds underweight. I had a vitamin D deficiency that made my bones ache. My social skills were non-existent. I was terrified of open doors. I couldn't be in a room with a window for 6 months because the concept of outside terrified me. The infinite sky felt like it was going to crush me. And the technology. God, the technology. Everything was touch screens and social media. I felt like a caveman thawing out of ice. I sold the house. I couldn't step foot in it again. I had it sold by a lawyer, instructing them to destroy the contents of the basement before showing it. The money from the house and his life insurance allows me to live quietly. It's blood money, but I feel I earned it. I'm writing this now because I recently found a box of old DVDs in a thrift store. I saw a copy of How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. I stood there in the aisle, clutching the plastic case, and I started weeping. A nice lady asked if I was okay. I couldn't explain to her that this stupid movie was my only friend for 3 years. I barely touched the surface of what happened in that room. The games I played to stay sane. The specific cruelties of the renovations. The dreams I had. It's late now. The nightlight is flickering and it's making me anxious. I need to go check the locks on my apartment door again. It'll be the 10th time tonight. If you have questions, ask. There's so much I haven't said, and talking to a therapist feels too clinical. I'd rather talk to you in the dark. I think I hear a noise outside. It's probably just the wind, but I'm going to check the locks, just in case. Story 4. I didn't think Needle Jack was real until I saw him face to face. No one knows who Needle Jack is or where he comes from, but every time someone goes to our local clinic to get their blood drawn, he's there. He's always humming a strange tune and asking people how they feel about syringes. How many times have you drawn this year? He asked one patient. Want to pull more blood? He questioned another. It's so odd. The nurses call him Needle Jack because that's all he seems to care about. The staff have tried to get rid of him. Many have asked the police to escort him off grounds. But no matter how many times he's arrested, he comes back as cheerful as ever. At first, I thought this was all a made-up legend, something to scare people off who were afraid to get their blood drawn. But when I went to clinic to do my own work, I ran into him. As soon as I entered the building, the staff seemed amped up like they were at the end of their nerves. I don't think we have any space today, the receptionist said, tapping keys on her computer. I glanced out the window, exhausted, then pivoted back to clock. My husband, Greg, was at home watching our newborn, Chloe. Today was the only day I could make an appointment. I begged her to let me in. I'll see what I can do. She recorded my information. Please have a seat. If there's an opening, a nurse will call you. I transferred my belongings to a chair and waited. I found it frightening that everyone seemed so on edge. The janitor mopping the floor kept his eyes on the doors and windows at all times. An older patient next to me peered over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to harass her. Now I understand why everyone appeared so disturbed. They were waiting for Needle Jack to arrive. And arrive he did. After about 5 minutes, a nurse came out and called my name. Sarah? I stood and followed her into the back. I settled into a chair and extended my arm to allow easy access to a vein. As soon as she inserted the point, a loud humming grew from the hall. What is that? Oh, that's just Jack. He's a patient at this location. Do your best to ignore him. I darted my eyes away from the noise, but his grating voice filled my ears. Can you ask him to pipe down? Of course. She glanced toward the hall, her voice shaking. Jack, will you please be quiet? You're disturbing a patient. Yes. Oh, yes. I'm sorry. For the next 30 seconds, the only sound came from the nurse as she switched out the vials on my syringe. One click, then another. All done. She taped gauze onto my arm. Feel free to sit for a few moments. You might feel dizzy. I glanced at my phone. It was almost 1 o'clock. Well past time to get back home and feed Chloe. I stood slowly and progressed toward the hall. When I stepped inside, there he was, a long-legged, skinny man who wore black jeans and a striped shirt. His arms appeared too short for his body, and his hair was trimmed into a bowl cut. I see you got your blood work done, he said, grinning. My name is Jack. I just love getting my blood drawn. He waddled up to me and got inches from my face. Dude, my mind screamed as I scooted past him. Back off. Would you like to see my blood drawn? No. Too bad. He pulled out an unused syringe and jammed it into his vein. Ah, feels so good. I was so mortified that I sprinted to the counter and told the receptionist what had happened. Yes, I know, she admitted. That's Jack. He's a regular here. Why does everyone keep saying that? Because he's here almost every day. Do something about it. Throw him out. I'm sorry. I heard his wispy voice behind me. Needle Jack was holding the blood-filled syringe he had just pulled from his vein. Oh, God. I nearly gagged as he licked the vial. Beautiful, he said. So beautiful. On the drive home, I was stunned. Who was he? Why was he there? Why couldn't anyone get rid of him? Once I got home and fed Chloe, I did some digging online. Turns out Needle Jack was a bit of a local legend. Apparently, he'd been terrified of needles as a child. Whenever his mom had brought him to a clinic, he'd scream, "No, Mommy, please. Don't let them poke me." But then one day, a mysterious woman came in and whispered something into his ear. He calmed down instantly and allowed the nurses to draw his blood. From that day on, the boy became obsessed with needles, even going so far as to demonstrate how to insert them into his veins for all to see. Even some of the clinic's online reviews mention him. Service is fine, but that needle guy is weird. Every time I go in, he's there talking to people, and it creeps me out. Why won't the staff get rid of him? 2 months later, I found out why. I was on my way home and headed downtown for an errand. Along the route, my front driver's side tire blew out. Shit! I pulled into the nearest repair shop. Coincidentally, it just so happened to be a block away from the clinic. No way. I mused, taking in the scene. I swaddled Chloe and wandered out to the sidewalk, figuring maybe I should drop in. I had 30 minutes to kill. I could ask the nurses a few more questions, but it all seemed so silly. Regardless, I felt compelled to visit the building. When I entered, the front desk was empty. There were no patients in the lobby either. Must be a slow day. Yes, oh yes. Oh God. I spun on my heel, my stomach turning. There he is. Why did I come here? I pulled Chloe close and headed for the exit. But before I could reach the door, Needle Jack stepped in, blocking my path. I was hoping you'd return. And even better, you've brought your child. What do you want from me? Your blood, he gestured to my arm. Her blood. It's essential to my survival. My eyes darted to the door at the other end of the lobby. After each test, I take a sample. A little taste here and there. Blood keeps me strong, but a child's is best. He pulled a syringe from his pocket. If I could just draw a little, I promise it won't hurt. Get away from me. I cradled Chloe's head and dashed to the far end of the room, sprinting outside. I'd nearly reached the crosswalk when I glanced back and saw Jack gaining on us. Please, Sarah, give me her blood. I stopped at the end of the sidewalk. The auto shop was just across the street, but traffic was blazing. Damn. I glanced both ways and dashed into the road, barely missing a semi. A loud honk split my ears as I reached the shop's parking lot, not even blinking. When I made it to the main doors, an agonizing scream caught my ears. I turned and gasped at the sight of Needle Jack, sprawled in the road, his torso twisted like a raw tiny noodle. A car had struck him head-on. Vehicles screeched to a halt on all sides of him. Don't worry, Sarah, he gasped and fell back into a mix of his own entrails. I'll be back. I always come back. The strangest thing happened after Needle Jack died. Almost instantly, the nurses and patients at the clinic seemed to come to their senses. It was like a long-held curse had been lifted off them. What was it like working there? A news anchor asked one of the staff members. A prison, they responded. Jack made us give him every patient's blood. He'd torture us if we refused. Greg became disgusted with all the media attention. He begged us to move so we could enjoy a fresh start. But how could we do that? Chloe is older now and thriving in preschool. Our friendships with other parents have grown, and our careers have blossomed. The only thing that bothers me are Jack's last words. Don't worry, Sarah. I'll be back. I always come back. I wonder if he ever will. Story 5. My violin student suddenly got much better. I think I figured out how. Alright, that's enough for the day. You need more practice at home. Try for more precision at the pizzicato, I told my student. She put down the violin, but didn't put it in the case immediately. Instead, she held it in her hand, her eyes vacant. After a while, she looked at me with watery eyes, as if about to cry, and asked, Andre, do you think I'm going to make it into Juilliard? I didn't want to answer, but I was also worried about something else. Kayla was my only student. If she suddenly decided that she had no chance of entering Juilliard Conservatory, I would be out of a job. Yes, you certainly can. You just need a bit more practice. I believe in you. I lied. Kayla was your typical suburban middle-class child, polite, driven, and talented. But to get into Juilliard, one of the most prestigious musical institutions in the entire world, one needed more than that. One would need obsession over drive, hunger over politeness, and God-given gifts over talent. Of those things, Kayla had none. She took a moment more, and then put the violin in the case. Thank you, Andre. See you next week, she told me. I felt bad for lying to her, but sometimes in life, you gotta do what's necessary for survival. The Reach was also your typical run-of-the-mill suburban family. Both parents work a white-collar job and want their children to succeed in an increasingly competitive and demanding world. I was in a pickle. I wanted Kayla to succeed, but at the same time, with her intensity and talents, she was simply not cut out for it. I walked out of the room and was greeted by Max. Max was a golden retriever and had been with the Reach family for over 5 years. He was on the friendly side for a housekeeping dog. He licked the hand that I reached out and rubbed his head on my arm. That interaction with Max was possibly the only positive thing I had all day. As I got out of the room, Peter Reach walked in, and moments later I heard shouting, followed by crashing sounds of items being thrown around. I even heard the words useless and waste of money. I pretended to hear nothing and walked out of the house. I took a long, slow walk back to the train. The cold afternoon air mixed with the empty streets to paint a bleak scene. The scenery on the train wasn't much better. Everyone around me was consumed with their smartphones. There was one musician who played a song that he wrote. No clap after performance. I wondered if Kayla would end up like him one day if she did not get into Juilliard. Back at home, I microwaved a pizza and binge my favorite thing, horror stories. This time, a man had fed his cat into a demonic door, thinking it would bring back his daughter. But what returned was a demon in the dead corpse of his daughter. It sounded derivative of that famous Stephen King novel, Pet Sematary, but I couldn't expect much more from a free horror show online. My meal finished. I checked social media. People talked about their jobs and complained about their pay, the increasing living costs, and the seemingly deteriorating infrastructure across the country. And here I was living in all of it. I checked the leaflet of the contest. New York's up and coming classical talents. When I put Kayla's name in the competition 6 months ago, we were both confident she would make it. She passed the first round with flying colors. But there were still 2 more rounds to go. Now, I wasn't so sure of our chances. The class in the following week wasn't much better. I knew that God Save the King was a difficult piece, but has struggled so long without any improvement. Kayla's chance wasn't looking good. After our practice, Peter Reach came and talked to me. "How's she looking, Andre?" "She's good. Just need a little more nudge in the right direction. She has a talent, just lacking in a bit of experience." I lied. "That's good news to hear. We are all rooted for you too. I'll be there when she performs, you know. Front row seats if we can get them. I'll do my best." But Peter, at this competition, they only accept 3 students, and so far hundreds have registered. I'm nothing about that. Me and Petunia, we believe in Kayla. She can do it. We're paying you good money to make sure that Kalia got into conservatory. I know I'll try my best. After the lesson, I greeted Max like always and got on the train back home. Kayla said something that made me think. She said she was willing to do whatever it takes to win the competition, no matter the cost. She had this look about her eyes, full of eagerness to win. But I didn't know what I could do more to make her better. I already tried from draconian regiments to lax encouraging routines, and so far, nothing worked. But Kayla was adamant this time. She said she had come across a new practice method that would help her improve. I thought nothing of it and went home. On Monday, the day before a lesson, I got a strange feeling. It was as if something had gone wrong, and the universe was sending me a signal. It was just a hunch, but it resonated so powerfully that it made my stomach feel sick. I dropped the meal I was holding and went to bed early, hoping that it was just something I ate. When I arrived at the Reach's residence on Tuesday, something felt off. Petunia Reach was home, and she looked visibly upset. She didn't even bother greeting me. I chalked it up to her having a bad day and entered Kayla's study like usual. Kayla played the piece beautifully. I was completely surprised. It was as if she had suddenly improved overnight. She hit the notes with emotion. After the first piece was finished, we moved on to Totentams. While she still has some problems, her playing was definitely better than before. "Wow, Kayla, you got a lot better. Did you spend extra hours practicing?" "Yeah, I told you I would do whatever it takes," she replied. When the lesson was over, I walked out of the room and waited in the hallway for Max like usual. Only he didn't come. I waited for a while more in the empty hallway until Petunia came in from the chair outside. She took a look at me, and I realized that her eyes were slightly red. "Are you waiting for Max?" she asked. "Yeah, I got used to him sniffing my hand." "Where is he? Is he sick?" "Max is dead. Someone poisoned him and even cut off his head." It was horrible. She started sobbing again. The news hit me like a truck. I love that dog so much. He was the only bright thing in what was otherwise a bleary day in a bleary neighborhood. We made a grave for him if you want to drop by. It's in the backyard. "Thanks. I'll give it a look." I stood at Max's grave for the better half of that afternoon. It was just a mound of earth with a wooden cross with Max haphazardly carved across. At least this day had one consolation. Kayla was getting better. That night, I had a nightmare. I was guiding Kayla through her usual practice routine. Then, out of nowhere, Max showed up. His body was decaying, muscles and sinews showing up in places where yellow fur should be. He was without his head, but I was certain that he was snarling at me. Then the dog dashed toward me and pinned me down. I looked to the distance. His head was using its tongue to slowly but surely move towards me, the jaws foaming and constantly biting like a pair of pincers. Kayla just stood there, looking, observing the macabre scene. Eventually, the head got close enough, and it aimed for my face. I woke with a start. It was 3 a.m. I spent the rest of the night listening to calming music and reviewing the pieces that I taught Kayla. Finally, the date of the competition arrived. I arrived early at Juilliard and waited for the reaches. They came soon after. Andre, I'm nervous. Kayla told me while the contestant right before her was performing, "Don't you worry about a thing, Kayla. You tried your best and you've improved. Now just go on up there and show them what you're made of." I made my closest imitation of a confident instructor. Seeing her nod her head and turn to the stage with determination almost made me believe I was won. But the fact was, I was as scared as she was, maybe even more. If Kayla didn't pass the second round, my career would be over. I looked at her and prayed that she did well. My hands were shaking so hard from anxiety. I had to bite them to calm down. My heart skipped a beat at every note that Kayla used to make mistakes in, fearing that she would fumble. But at the end, she delivered the pieces perfectly and with emotion, and received ovation from the judge board. The result came after 3 days. Kayla got into the third round. I jumped for joy the moment she texted me the news. That day, I treated myself to a burger dinner. It was expensive, and I savored every bite. The real work was starting. We had around 3 months, and we now had to master what I dreaded: Danse Macabre and Caprice number 24. Both pieces had a wide range of techniques to allow the performer room for interpretation, and they were of course very challenging. We practiced the pieces in the past, but never focused on them. I didn't believe Kayla would pass the second round. Now that she had, my expectations of her changed. She would have to give it everything she got, and things worked out in the beginning. She was making strides in the beginning parts, but the more we practiced, the worse she became. It was as if whatever talent she had prior to the third round just up and vanished. After one afternoon full of struggle and error fixing, I went to Peter Reach and talked to him. "Hey Peter, so about the third round. I think it's really difficult. I'm going to need Kayla to spend more time practicing at home. Can you do that for me?" "Sure, no problem. I'll give her a nudge. You just focus on getting her into that conservatory, okay?" As soon as I left the room that afternoon, I heard items being thrown against the walls again. "God damn it, Kayla. Do you know how much I paid and toiled for you to get into that competition?" The sound from the room rang out, reverberating throughout the hallway. Petunia stood outside near the kitchen. Her hands jumped at every crash and thud in the room. "That night," Kayla texted me, "I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Please trust in me," she wrote. I told her that I believed in her and was sorry about her being told off. She didn't reply. By the next week, when I arrived at the Reach's house, there was a group of people and they were all wearing black. I stood out like a sore thump with my denim shirt and white t-shirt. I looked around for a while, drawing stares and strange looks from people, until I found Kayla sitting in a chair in her practicing room. Her eyes were red, just like her mother's that day. "Kayla, what happened? Did someone pass away?" It was as if she was waiting for someone to ask her that. She sprang up and hugged me and cried. "It's my mom. She died. Someone crashed into her, Andre. Oh my God, I'm so sorry." I patted her on the back. They even took her head away. We couldn't even have an open casket. "My God, that's horrible. I'm so sorry, Kayla. Look, just take a couple weeks off, okay? I'll tell your father." "No, Father said we should still practice today." "Where's your father?" "I don't think we should practice today. He's upstairs." "Andre, please. Mother would have wanted this. I have to give it all I got." I had no heart to turn the girl down. So we closed the room's door and began our practice session. The sound of the practice intermingled with the steps from people outside the room. The air was cold and dry, but my ears were red hot. I was embarrassed with myself. I should have asked Kayla first if she was free. Now I was stuck here making her practice her pieces when her mother had died. I had no heart to do the practice. But Kayla was fully committed. She played the pieces quite well, making no mistakes. I told her that she had really improved and ended the practice early. Back at home, I was upset and still embarrassed. I still remember the stares of people the moment I walked out of the Reach's practice room. They looked at me like I was a freak for butting into a funeral. I needed something to take away the embarrassment. So I cooked my favorite dish as a treat, goat curry. The smell of spices wafted through the air, making my mouth water. My neighbors came by to complain, but I paid it no mind. I wanted to give myself something nice. That night, I reviewed my teaching plan with Kayla. She had mastered the pieces. The only things left were now keeping her consistent and making sure she added her own voice into the pieces. The first thing was easy. The second thing was nearly impossible in such a short time, but I figured Kayla would manage it with her determination. I had another nightmare. Kayla and I were still in her room, practicing, but suddenly the doors slowly opened on their own, and in walked her mother's headless corpse. Its gait was inhuman, unnatural, yet somehow I still knew that it was facing me. Then the now decayed corpse of Max sauntered in the room, making the air reek with the smell of rotten meat. I turned to look at Kayla. She was still deep in her practice, her eyes completely shut. Then the two headless corpses rushed towards me, and that was when I woke up sweating. My phone showed 3 a.m. in our next practice session. Kayla managed to make no mistakes in her practice. She had improved considerably. The strange thing was that it seemed grief had only strengthened her skill and conviction. My admiration for her grew. Here she was, a teenager who had to deal with the loss of her mother and her pet, and still forged on. I reflected on my life. So many wasted chances and blunders. I promised myself to put everything I had into making Kayla the virtuoso she deserved to be. Kayla was only lacking in one thing now. She had to add her own flair to the pieces to make them truly hers. Only, we were hitting a wall once again. Kayla tried to add her own expressions to the pieces, but they just came out forced and clumsy. We tried for one more month, but whatever she added seemed offbeat and out of place. Finally, after one frustrating afternoon, I told Kayla, "Look, I really appreciate the tremendous amount of effort that you've put in, but we've been hitting our heads against the wall for over a month now and made no real progress. I think it'd be best if you just keep the pieces like they were. But then the judges won't give me point for creativity." Well, yes, but I still think playing the pieces as is a safer bet. Maybe the other contestants are just like us. I want to stand out, Andre. You told me I could do this. I'm not just doing it for me. I'm doing it for Max and Mom. I couldn't find anything to say. She was right, but I wasn't wrong either. We were in way over our heads. But I looked at Kayla's eyes, so full of determination and willpower. I steeled myself and told her that we would try again. I told her that she needed to bring out her best, and then some, and that she needed to spend almost every waking minute practicing. Draconian, I knew, but this was our last shot at a chance to win. She nodded her head, tears falling down. I told her that things would be fine, and I'd take care of it. I walked out of the house and crashed into Peter Reach on my way out. It seemed he had just gotten back home from drinking. He really had changed from the man I knew 1 month ago. He wore a casual t-shirt with suit pants and didn't even bother to wear matching socks. He looked disheveled and reeked of booze. I told him that me and Kayla were going to try our best and that he should encourage her instead of shouting at her. He only nodded and without another word entered the house. I didn't stay this time to hear if there were any other sound of items being thrown on walls. 2 weeks before the competition, the Reaches had another problem. Peter Reach had been drinking at a bar and had a fight with the bouncer. The bouncer pushed him too hard and he fell, his head falling on the concrete. Kayla phoned me from the hospital and told me that her father was now in a vegetative state. She would be taken care of by some relatives from out of town and would move to live with them. The relative would stay in her house for 2 more weeks until after the competition, and after that they would move. This time, Kayla performed the pieces beautifully. She had practiced so much that even her calloused fingertips were bleeding. I had never been prouder. I told her that the suffering of her entire family was so that she could have her moment to shine in the competition. On the morning before the competition, Kayla received another bad news. The hospital where her father was being kept alive had a power cut, and the backup generator didn't activate in time. Her father was gone. Kayla didn't even cry this time, just stared vacantly into the empty space ahead of her. What was worse, her father's corpse was later stolen that night from the morgue. They found him in the backyard of his home, his head missing. She cried when she told me the news. That night, I had drank a double dose of sleeping pills in order to fall asleep. In my dream, Kayla and I were on the stage. She performed her pieces while I was tied up. In the audience were the corpses of two people. My instinct told me those were the Reaches. Then from the aisle, a corpse of a dog walked slowly towards me. It had 3 heads on it. Petunia's head on the right, Max's head in the middle, and Peter's head on the left. The dog body had lost most of its skin now. There were only decaying flesh and bones left. It jumped on the stage and stood next to me, from behind the dog. A door opened and it advanced toward me. Inside it were fire and crimson light, and I could feel the heat radiating, searing my skin and charring my clothes. The alarm woke me from a nightmare. I took a moment to calm down, then brushed my teeth, ignored my neighbor complain about the smell again, and put on my best suit. This was a day long in the making. I arrived early at the conservatory as usual. After several minutes, Kayla arrived with an unfamiliar woman. This must have been the relative that she told me about. I led Kayla to the backstage and waited for our turn. This is it, Kayla. You've got this. We both sacrificed so much. I believe in you. Now go out there and show her what you got. I told her when it was her turn. Once again, I shuddered at every note that she improvised, looking at the judges' faces to see if they disapproved. Kayla played the pieces beautifully, her music rising in waves of emotions, a crescendo drowning out everything around her. In that moment, Kayla was like an angel sent to rescue me. When she finished, I shed a tear. The judges stood up and applauded. We had succeeded. I walked out onto the stage with Kayla and waved at the judges. It was only right. This was part of my work as well. I hugged Kayla. Everything you and I've sacrificed were led to this. Do not forget this moment. I'm proud of you, Kayla. She had only time to nod and smile before I heard footsteps from behind and was pushed down on the ground by forceful hands. Gotcha, you murdering bastard. Everyone get away. We're apprehending a serial murderer. The voice boomed. His grip tightened, and it hurt my arms. I wiggled but was not successful. Kayla Reach? I'm sorry, kid. This psycho is your music teacher, right? Well, he killed your parents. We found their heads at his apartment, in some sort of ritualistic circle. There was a dog's head, too. His neighbor's been complaining about the rotting smell for weeks. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, kid. Kayla looked at me, her eyes full of fear, and shortly after, anger mixed with bewilderment. She broke down, crying. Didn't she know? To make it in this world, we had to sacrifice everything? Didn't she know I did it for her? For both of our future careers? How could she look at me like that? I had to do it, and I would do it again. For her. For me. Story 6. Don't blink. I don't look at paper maps anymore. If I can help it, I don't look at fields either. Especially when the corn dries out in October and the stalks turn that pale bone color. My name is Phoebe. I'm 25, and until last month, I was a junior geospatial analyst for a subcontractor that works with the Department of the Interior. Basically, I made maps. Most of the work is digital now. Cleaning up satellite telemetry, correcting zoning lines for flood insurance, that sort of boring administrative stuff. It's good work. Or it was. 3 weeks ago, my supervisor, a man named Derek whose only personality trait is drinking stale coffee, called me over to his desk. He had a quadrant up on his monitor. It was a section of rural Appalachia, tucked away in a valley that technically shouldn't exist based on the elevation models we use. Data corruption, Derek mumbled, tapping the screen with a pen cap. The satellite sweep from 0914 and last week all show the same thing. A blur. Just pixels. Like someone took an eraser to the raw image data. I looked closer. It was a rectangular patch of gray in the middle of a sea of deep forest green. Maybe cloud cover? reflection anomaly, for 3 separate flyovers over 10 years? Derek shook his head. The county records say it's BLM land, but an old deed says it's private agricultural. We can't publish the updated regional topos for the hole in the middle. I need you to drive out there. Take the LiDAR drone. Take the handheld GPS, get me ground truth. Prove it exists. I was actually excited. Field work was rare. I packed my gear into one of the agency jeeps, loaded up a cooler with sandwiches and energy drinks, and started the 4-hour drive into the mountains. The spot was deep in the backcountry. I eventually had to leave the jeep at the end of a logging trail that looked like it hadn't seen a tire since the Reagan administration. The GPS on my dashboard had already given up, displaying a questioning circle, so I grabbed a heavy-duty Garmin handheld, my backpack, and the case for the mapping drone. It was a 40-minute hike through dense scrub brush and pine before the tree line abruptly stopped. It didn't taper off. It stopped dead like a wall. I stepped out of the cool shade of the forest and into the valley. This was the black spot on the map. The valley was bowl-shaped, surrounded on all sides by high, steep ridges that probably messed with radio signals. The sky above was a flat, heavy sheet of gray straight as clouds, diffusing light, so there were almost no shadows. It was farmland, but it was wrong. The soil was churned and dark, tilled into perfect rows that stretched for acres, but nothing was growing. No corn, no wheat, no soybeans. Just acres and acres of dark dirt and patches of yellow, dying witchgrass. And the silence, that was the first thing that hit my chest, a physical pressure. In the woods behind me, there had been cicadas, squirrels, the rustle of deer. Here, silence. Total vacuum-sealed silence. I checked my equipment. The drone compass was spinning lazily, unable to find north. The GPS screen just read calculating, indefinitely. Great, I muttered. The sound of my own voice was shockingly loud. I started walking down the center path between the tilled rows, intending to set the drone in the geographic center of the valley. That's when I saw the first one. About 50 yards out, standing on a crooked wooden post, was a scarecrow. It was fairly standard at first glance. Blue flannel shirt, faded denim overalls, a burlap sack for a head stuffed with straw. It faced away from me, looking toward the center of the valley. As I walked past it, I felt a shiver crawl up my neck. I'm not a superstitious person. I'm a scientist, but the proportions were unsettling. The arms weren't just sticks. They were padded out to look muscular. The hands weren't loose straw. They were white gardening gloves, stitched tight, fingers curled as if gripping something invisible. I kept walking. 100 yards further, I found 2 more. They were smaller, child-sized. They were positioned differently. They weren't up on posts. They were on the ground. One, dressed in a little pink dress stained brown by the elements, was seated on the dirt. The other, wearing a boy's striped polo shirt, was kneeling opposite her. I stopped. I took out my binoculars and focused on them. Between them, resting in the dirt, was a tea set. It was real porcelain, cracked and filthy. "Who does this?" I whispered. It looked like an art installation, a really morbid, middle-of-nowhere art project. I pressed on, deeper into the valley. The topography was flat, making it easy to see the layout as I moved further in. And as I walked, the dread in my gut turned into cold, heavy lead. It wasn't just a few scarecrows. The fields were full of them. There were hundreds, and they weren't guarding crops. They were the crop, or rather, they were the population. I reached what looked like the town square of this bizarre display. In a wide clearing of dead grass, someone had dragged out furniture. Old, rotting velvet armchairs, dining room tables, school desks, park benches, and the scarecrows were everywhere, enacting a silent, motionless pantomime of life. To my left, a family of 4 sat around a dinner table. The father figure had a burlap face painted with a crude, wide black smile. He wore a suit that was rotting off his straw frame. The mother wore pearls, plastic, cheap pearls, and her painted mouth was a surprise. Oh, they had empty plates in front of them. To my right, rows of school desks held smaller figures. They faced a larger scarecrow at the front who held a ruler taped to its glove. I should have turned back. Every instinct in my primate brain was screaming at me that this was predator territory. Run, Phoebe. Run back to the car. But I had a job and I had a camera. I pulled out my DSLR and started snapping photos. Documentation. Derek wouldn't believe this without proof. The sheer effort required to haul this furniture out here, to stitch these hundreds of dolls. It was insanity. I moved through the park scene. Scarecrows frozen on rusted swing sets. A scarecrow walking a dog made of hay and wire. It was then I noticed the wind. The valley had been breezy when I arrived, a constant, low draft sweeping down from the mountains. It rustled the dry grass and made the hundreds of flannel shirts and burlap sacks flap and snap. Wish, snap, wish, snap. It was the only sound in the world. Then it stopped. The wind just died. The stillness that followed was absolute. It was as if the world had held its breath. I stood in front of a park bench, about 5 feet away from a scarecrow dressed like an old man, complete with a flat cap and a cane. I lowered my camera to check the light exposure on the screen. I frowned at the reading. It took me maybe 2 seconds. I blinked, rubbing grit from my eye, and looked back up at the old man. He was looking at me. I froze. Before his head had been tilted down, chin resting on his chest, looking at the ground. Now, the burlap face was tilted up. The black, painted eyes, just erratic swirls of tar or paint, were fixed directly on my face. Okay, I said, my voice shaking. Wind moved you, obviously, but there was no wind. The air was stagnant and dead. I took a step back. It's just gravity. I reasoned aloud. The stuffing shifted. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I needed to leave. Right now. I didn't care about the drone data. I turned around to head back toward the tree line. I looked at the schoolroom setup. All 20 of the children scarecrows were now standing. My blood went cold. I swear, my heart stopped beating for a full 3 seconds. A moment ago, they had been seated at the desks. Now, they were standing, their stick legs awkwardly braced against the metal chair legs. And every single painted face was turned toward me. I didn't move. I couldn't breathe. I stared at them, eyes wide, burning. Nothing happened. They stood there, inanimate, bundles of hay and cloth. Don't blink. A voice in my head whispered, don't you dare blink. I backed up slowly. My boot heel caught on a tuft of root, and I flinched, my eyes shutting for a fraction of a second in panic. Rustle, a sound dry as autumn leaves rubbing together. I snapped my eyes open. They were out from behind the desks. All of them. They had advanced maybe 3 feet. Their poses were stiff, jerky, like bad stop-motion animation frozen in time. One of them, a figure in a red sweater, was reaching out a gloved hand. It wasn't a prank. There was nobody pulling wires. I was surrounded by acres of open ground. The wind picked up suddenly, a strong gust that blew hair across my face. I gasped, waiting for them to rush me, but they didn't. As the wind blew, shaking their clothes and rattling their wooden spines, they remained completely still. They looked like inanimate objects again. The life had drained out of them with the return of the air currents. I understood the rules. I didn't know how or why, but I understood the logic. Wind, safety. No wind plus eyes open. Standoff. No wind plus eyes closed. Move. I scrambled backward, turning to run while the wind was blowing. I sprinted past the dinner party family. Their heads bobbed in the breeze, lifeless and limp. I made it maybe 50 yards before the wind died again. I skid to a halt, spinning around, terrified to leave my back exposed in the silence. Silence. Total silence. I stood there, panting, sweat stinging my eyes. I stared at the dinner party. They were 50 feet away. The father, mother, and 2 children. My eyes were watering. I needed to blink. Come on. I whimpered, begging the sky. Blow. Nothing. 1 tear leaked out. The burning was unbearable. I winked my left eye, keeping it right open. Nothing moved. Okay, I can cheat. I swapped eyes, winking the right one. The father's scarecrow shifted. It wasn't a run. It was a glitch. One frame, he was at the head of the table. I winked. Now he was standing on top of the table, towering high, his arms spread wide like a hawk descending. I screamed. I couldn't help it. I blinked with both eyes in sheer reflex. Crunch rustled. I opened my eyes. He was right in front of me. He was huge. Up close, the smell was overwhelming. Rotting wet straw, moldy fabric, and something else underneath, something like copper and dried meat. His burlap face was inches from mine. The painted smile was cracked where the fabric had folded. I stared into the painted swirls of his eyes. I couldn't look away. I locked my muscles, forcing my eyelids to stay up. He was frozen in mid-reach, his white gardening gloves hovering near my throat. I could see the individual fibers of the burlap. I could see stains on the fabric that looked suspiciously dark. The other scarecrows were moving in the periphery. I could feel them. Whenever I focused too hard on the father, the edges of my vision blurred and the others, the school children, the swing set watchers, encroached. I needed wind. Please, I whispered through clenched teeth. My eyes felt like they were filled with sand. My vision was swimming. The silence stretched on. It felt like minutes. It was probably only seconds. The father's painted mouth seemed to be stretching. I knew it was impossible. It was paint on cloth. But the weave of the burlap was pulling apart, hole by hole, widening that black void. I couldn't hold it. My eyelids fluttered. I dropped the ground. It was instinct. The second my eyes closed, I threw myself flat onto the dirt and rolled. I heard the swish of something heavy swinging through the space where my head had just been. It sounded like a baseball bat hitting a heavy bag. I scrambled up, eyes snapping open. The father was twisted around, his waist contorted an unnatural 180 degrees, looking down at where I had been. His gloved hand was buried up to the wrist in the soil. I ran. I didn't look back. I knew the wind was still dead. I knew that because I couldn't hear in my ears, which meant every time I blinked, they were gaining. I tried to time it. Run, 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 blink. Shuffle thumb. They were getting louder. It wasn't just one or two. It sounded like a stampede of dried husks. Run, 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 blink. Shuffle thumb. I could hear the fabric rubbing against fabric. A dry, rasping, screeching sound. I saw the tree line ahead. The safety of the forest. The boundary. I didn't know if they could leave the field, but I had to pray they couldn't. The scarecrows were rooted to this town. Surely. I was 20 yards from the trees. The wind was still gone. My lungs were burning. Cry out for oxygen, but my eyes were worse. I had tears streaming down my face, blurring my vision into a watery smear. I tripped. My boot caught in a hidden rut in the dirt. I went down hard, slamming my chest into the earth. The impact knocked the wind out of me. My eyes slammed shut in pain. I didn't open them immediately. I lay there, gasping, trying to suck in air. And I felt them. I felt the sunblock out. I felt them standing over me. I heard the creaking of which straining against fabric. I smelled the rot. It was suffocating. I felt a sharp, crushing pain clamp onto my right calf. I screamed, trying to kick out, but the grip was like iron. 5 rigid, unyielding fingers squeezed my leg, grinding the muscle against the bone. It felt cold, a stinging, dry cold that burned through my denim jeans. Something clawed at my boot, dragging me backward across the dirt, away from the tree line. No! I shrieked, thrashing blindly. My boot connected with something hard and wooden, sending a jarring shock up my leg. But the grip only tightened, pinching so hard, I felt something in my leg pop. I waited for the end. I waited for those white gardening gloves to close around my neck. But then, I felt a cool touch on my cheek. It was a breeze. Whish. The hand on my leg went limp. The impossible strength vanished instantly. The leaves in the forest ahead rustled. The high grass hissed. The wind was back. I scrambled to my hands and knees, coughing, and looked up. They were all there. A semicircle of nightmare figures standing over me. The father was in the center, his hand extended, inches from my hair. The little girl in the pink dress was collapsed on the ground behind me, her white-gloved hands still resting loosely on my bruised ankle. But they were swaying. The wind was pushing against them, and they were just dolls. Floppy, lifeless dolls responding to physics. The malice was gone, replaced by the mindless motion of the breeze. I crawled. I didn't stand up. I just scrambled on all fours until I hit the underbrush of the forest. I clawed my way into the pines, scraping my hands on bark and needles until I was well past the tree line. Only then did I stand up and look back. They were still there at the edge of the field. They hadn't crossed the line where the grass turned to pine needles. They stood in a jagged row, swaying gently. As I watched, the wind began to die down again. The swaying slowed. I didn't wait to see if they would move. I turned and sprinted the 40 minutes back to the Jeep, moving faster than I ever have in my life. I locked the doors, threw the garment into the passenger seat, and peeled out of that logging road so fast I almost wrapped the vehicle around the trunk. I didn't sleep for 3 days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that burlap face, the father. When I got back to the office, I told Derek I found nothing. I told him the logging road was washed out and I couldn't reach the coordinates. I gave him the memory card from the drone, but I had wiped it with a strong magnet I kept in my toolkit first. I told him it malfunctioned. I quit the next day. I told him it was family issues. I've been living in the city since then, somewhere with streetlights, somewhere with constant noise, traffic, people, movement. The doctors tell me the deep purple bruising on my calf is just a hematoma from the fall, but I know better. The bruise is shaped perfectly like a small handprint. It hasn't faded in 3 weeks. If anything, it's getting darker, turning a distinct shade of dead leaf brown. I'm writing this because I checked Google Earth this morning. I don't know why. Morbid curiosity. Maybe the glitch is gone. The pixelated blur over the valley has been updated with a new high-res image. You can see the field. You can see the rows of tilled, dead earth. But looking at the satellite image, zoomed all the way in, the arrangement is different. The furniture is gone. The dinner tables, the school desks, the park benches. They've been moved. They're arranged in a new pattern now. A pattern that spirals outward from the center of the valley. They're forming a line, a procession, and the line is heading into the woods, towards a logging road. They aren't residents anymore. They're migrating. And this morning, looking out my 4-story apartment window, the streets were quiet, the birds weren't singing, and the wind stopped blowing. If you see one, if you see a scarecrow where it shouldn't be, or a pile of old clothes in the corner of your room that looks a little too full, don't blink. God help you, don't blink. Story 7. My classmate was obsessed with these statues called the Green Goddesses. I'm an art student at uni, currently enrolled in a photography class. A few weeks ago, we've been given the task to document a person, place, or thing. For me, I chose to focus on car rust and wear. For my classmate, Ima, it was the Green Goddesses and the building they perch on. Ima was a very passionate artist. Got into an internship her freshman year. I had a few classes in the past with her, but we never really talked much. Photography class was pretty much the same. We knew of each other, but not much about. That is, until I heard about the statues. The Green Goddesses struck my interest, as I carry an infatuation with statues. Credit to Monument Mythos for this affinity. So, when Ima discussed them in class, I was hooked. Her initial photo was taken outside looking in. Reflections abstracted the space, but the contents within the building were already nonsensical. Scattered chairs, artworks hung in an odd composition, and an open vault. It was one photo pinned to the wall. Class huddled around for closer observation. My professor, Ohan, found them very compelling. Interested in the charm of the inside the building. Is there any way you can get in? Professor Ohan's question pointed at Ima, but his eyes remained on the picture. Not that I encouraged trespassing, but there might be a way to get in contact with the current owner. He added quickly, now turned to face the class again. The owner is from New York. rarely comes over. Ima had the answer loaded and ready. You think you can get a good front view of them? Professor Ohan's curiosity matched mine, only he had the courage to voice it. She explained that the building itself was the old county courthouse, then it was a YMCA, and now a time capsule with seldom visitors. The goddesses sit at the edge of the roof, looking over the river. To come face to face with the statues is to stand on the edge of a drop-off straight into the water. I was in awe, but this new information was subsided as class continued. Soon enough, the whole conversation was left to the storage room of my brain, forgotten until weeks later. The following classes were uneventful due to most of our time being dedicated to progress on the documentary project. These work days were quite pointless when it's a night class, as natural light is preferable. However, there was something peculiar I did notice. Ima had not been showing up to class. Obviously, college students like to skip classes, but Ima was like me when it came to attendance. We both valued college as an opportunity that should not be taken for granted. Ima herself was dedicated to her craft, which is how she got an internship in her freshman year. Long story short, Ima is not one to skip class, especially for several weeks. Nobody else paid mind to this. Professor Ohan would call her name during attendance, but not spending much time pondering her whereabouts. When I asked some classmates who knew her well if they knew where Ima was, they replied with shrugs and passive uncertainty. Though I don't know her much, I have a bad feeling. My gut says it has something to do with the statues. Something about the way she talked about them. I'll be back with more research. Hopefully a lead. Story 8. Yesterday, I watched a man try to quantum tunnel. Yesterday, I interviewed and watched the first live test of a man named Clyde. Clyde called himself a doctor, but had no official credentials. What he did have was a lot of money, and an obsession with quantum physics. He invited me, a self-employed reporter and science communicator, to come see his latest project. I accepted his offer, gathered my gear, and drove to his remote lab in the mountains. The lab appeared as a lavish summer home any ultra-wealthy man might buy or commission for himself. 3 stories, nice brickwork, too many windows, a pool, and all the amenities one could think of wanting. The only thing there wasn't was staff. Clyde was waiting for me on the front porch to the estate when I arrived alone. I parked, reached to grab my equipment, and then found him opening the door for me, despite feeling odd at the attentive forwardness. I thanked him, then followed him in at his request. He was a stockier man, looking to be in his early 40s with gray speckled hair and goatee. He wore a buttoned sweater vest over a turtleneck, and a thin lens bifocals resting on his round nose. He addressed me by my full name, which told me he had researched me as I had him. I hadn't given him my full name or anything beyond my pen name. When he did so, he shook my hand, and I noticed his odd gloves. They were in navy, with intense geometric patterning. They were immensely cold to the touch, but not in any painful way. He smiled awkwardly at that and apologized. He showed me inside and treated me to a light brunch before showing me a few smaller demonstrations. It was at this point that I started recording, and the following is a transcript of our conversation with provided context. Clyde, are we recording? Jenny, yes, is that okay? I know this is just a few conceptual pieces, but I'd like to document this too for my transcribing later. Clyde, yes, of course. That's what we're here for today. After all, right? So, here I have a few things to help me explain what we're doing here today. I'm sure you are, but are you familiar with quantum tunneling? Jenny, yeah, it's when something can slip through the empty space of atoms. Clyde, that's not a terrible answer, but it's less about atoms being empty space and more about the method of moving. Let's start here. Clyde walks to the kitchen and grabs a piece of cheese from brunch and places it in an opaque box when he returns to the demonstration display. Clyde, okay, let's pretend it's been a day or so. Is the cheese moldy? Jenny, are we doing Schrodinger's cat? Clyde cheese, but yes. Sorry, I do love playing what's in my pocket with these things. Jenny, well, teach, it's in a superposition and is both until observed. Though I'd say it's probably fine at the moment and will be tomorrow. Maybe gross, but not moldy. Why are we talking superposition? Clyde, particles are also in superposition. They have a waveform and also have mass. They don't settle anywhere until observed. Jenny, so if they're a wave, do they have different energy levels when observed? Clyde, you're reading ahead of class. If I may extend the metaphor. You're right though. Let's do this example next. Clyde then showed a small shallow bin of water, with a wall separating the pool in two. He then took out a small metal cube. Clyde, now, this isn't quantum tunneling because we don't have anything with wave form, but I'm going to drop this and make waves so we have a visual. Of course, you know that what we're actually seeing is just the waves pushing the wall to make waves on the other side. He dropped the cube during his sentence. The light splash made ripples in its side of the bin, and mostly were contained to its side. The ripples hitting the barrier made much smaller ripples on the opposite side of the bin. Clyde, these smaller waves are like the particles that quantum tunnel. Most of the waves bounce off, but some show up on the other side. Not all the energy made it through, only some, just like in quantum tunneling. Except these waves of energy will never be mass. Jenny, and you have the opposite problem. You're mass and can't be energy. Also, if you could have waveform, you don't want to only have a little bit of you tunneled. Clyde, both good observations, but I unfortunately don't have a way to show you my solve for that first part. I can show you how I'm going to solve the second part here. However, Clyde then unscrewed a canister that began emitting heavy vapors. He reached in and pulled out a puck pattern the same way as his gloves. He also retrieved the metal cube from the water. Clyde, this here puck is a superconductor, and it works best when it's very cold. This one has been resting in liquid CO2, so it's plenty cold. He placed the cube above it, and it began to float motionlessly above the superconductor. Clyde, this cube is magnetized and is now quantum locked with the superconductor. If I push it, it will return to where it's been locked. Clyde did so, and he could move the cube, but shunned it back to where he locked it the moment he let off the pressure. Clyde, my gloves and the rest of the suit down in the lab are both superconductors, and quantum lock the very particles that make up my body, so I'm primed for quantum tunneling. As soon as I have waveform. Jenny, that's quite a claim. Clyde, that's why you're here, to see before you believe. The rest of the recording is me asking clarifying and follow-up questions. For example, Jenny, why were the gloves now? Clyde, acclimation to the normally deadly cold takes time, and I don't always want to wait to get hands on. So I wear these and have a glove wall system to do smaller bits of work. Clyde showed me to the elevator where we rode down to the lab. It was subterranean and was dedicated mostly to his work on quantum tunneling. The exceptions were the bathroom and a photo developing darkroom. He said it was just convenient to have that hobby space down here as there were no windows, and light to affect photo development. The lab was cold enough that I could see our breath, but Clyde had a heavy coat ready for me on a coat rack. The lab has two main parts, the observation chamber and the testing chamber. The observation chamber had monitors, seats, and a few hundred buttons. It was also the access to the bathroom, darkroom, and testing chamber via pressure lock in the large transparent wall. The testing chamber was a much larger room that had paneling of electromagnets set up like a U-shaped track. There was a small, person-sized capsule made of the patterned material quantum, locked a bit off the ground at the start of the track. At the end was a sturdy-looking wall and a complex system of netting and cushioning behind it. The testing chamber also had a small room in the corner where I could see the rest of Clyde's patterned suit. It looked skin-tight and would likely only ever fit him. There were no mouth or eye holes in the mask. Lastly, there was a smaller, less convoluted monitor and control station. Clyde excused himself to prepare for the experiment, but before he did, he set me up at the monitors. He showed me how to use the intercom, but said once he was in a vacuum it wouldn't work. He also let me watch recordings of his previous experiments. He stepped into the test chamber and into his changing room. I watched the videos he set for me. A small-scale test where he got one particle to tunnel, then a more impressive test of tunneling a coin. I was blown away. This alone was enough to shake the scientific world. When he stepped out in his geometric pattern suit, I gave him a bewildered look. Only a truly mad scientist wouldn't be satisfied by this monumental achievement. Clyde pressed the intercom and told me he was acclimating and would start depressurizing the chamber while he did. He tossed out a joke about not wanting to catch fire from the air friction. He seemed as casual as ever about the situation. I sat down and waited with worried anticipation. Before I knew it, he was giving me a thumbs up and tapping at his terminal. Things began to hum around me as systems activated. Clyde vaulted up into his quantum lock capsule and gave me a small wave before closing himself inside. On my monitor, there was a countdown from 20. I didn't feel ready. Suddenly things were moving along so fast. I tried to catch my anxious breath. Was this crazy? Yes, but all science felt that way at times. Was this too crazy? It seemed like he understood so much of what he was doing upstairs. 6, 5, 4, 3. The screen counted, and I locked my attention quantum-like to the starting experiment. 2, 1. The electromagnetic tiles flicked like hyperspeed dominoes, and the capsule rocketed at neck-breaking speeds. It whipped around the bend faster than the blink would even allow me to miss. Clyde shot toward the wall, almost seeming to become a flash of light. The capsule slammed into the wall, sending shards and debris scattering. After such speed of action, the crash seemed to be in slow motion. Chunks of failure and disaster embedded themselves around the crash site. I screamed in horror and shock while the entire lab shook. I'd just seen Clyde kill himself trying to quantum tunnel. I frantically rummaged through the terminal functions to pressurize the room, accidentally finding the light controls first. Eventually, I was able to hear the valves activate and waited anxiously for the room to be enterable. The test chamber was colder than ever when I finally made it through the pressure lock. The chilled artificial atmosphere felt sharp in my lungs. I ran to the crash site and found the wreckage simultaneously resembling a stomped soda can and a dropped sheet of ice. However, I could find no blood, bone, or body. I couldn't even find the suit. Confusion flooded me. I looked at the wall. It had held up to the force well enough to be standing. I saw nothing on the other side of it. I went back to the monitor and watched the crash again via the recording. He hadn't just looked like a flash of light. He might have been light. Had he been successful in giving himself a wave form? I looked at the darkroom and got an idea. I grabbed and broke the coat rack to make a walking stick, then plunged myself into darkness via the terminal. I entered the photo development darkroom through the rotating cylindrical door. There was a dim red light within the chamber. I found a closed box with sheets of photo paper. I took a few out of the darkroom and fumbled with my Kotrack walking stick to the pressure lock. Back in the test chamber, I placed photo papers around the room. Maybe if he was a waveform, the photo paper would react to him. I let the papers expose for an hour before I couldn't wait any longer in the darkness. I retrieved my photo paper and brought them to the darkroom. There, one by one, I started using the pre-mixed fluids to develop them. The first sheet remained white. The second sheet also failed to react to any light. The third showed no sign of anything. I began to doubt there was hope of learning anything, until I began developing my fourth sheet. Lines and dark spots began to appear on the sheet, incomprehensible and unrecognizable to me in the dim light. But there was an image's negative developing on the sheet. I finished the process, setting the image. I took it out to the observation chamber and turned the light back on. I looked at the sheet. There on the paper was contorted, mangled visage of Clyde. The difficult to make out details showed him elongated, warped, and suffering. If any human emotion was left to be read, it was of abject anguish. I'm a woman of the sciences, but I prayed in that moment that he would die and end his quantum suffering. Story 9. I got a beautiful mirror for free, but I soon realized why the owner wanted it gone. I was strolling the flea market. A month ago, I moved into my new apartment. It was small but cozy. I needed lots of furniture and had been searching local flea markets and online sites for weeks. I was still missing a sofa, a night table, and a mirror for my bathroom. I looked at the items offered by both retailers and people from my neighborhood. Old watches, cameras, lamps, desks, and more. Every time I saw something that I liked, there was something wrong with it. A sofa with claw marks from pets everywhere. A nightable with only 3 legs that cost more than if I would buy it new. Old cabinets that have been painted in awful colors. Then, after wandering through the endless rows of used items, I saw it. A beautiful, but simple mirror offered as the only item on the table of a young man. He did not sell anything else, only the mirror. It had a stunning antique frame around it, something you would expect in an old palace. I had a thing for antique furniture. My friends often joked that my new apartment would look like someone's grandfather chose the furniture. I looked at the price tag. For free, it said. A mirror like this would get sold for a small fortune at every auction. I inspected it, but could not find any damage or other factors that would justify giving it away for free. So I immediately took it. The man looked at me like he felt guilty giving me the mirror. So I double-checked again after bringing it home, but it was perfect. The first few days, I really enjoyed looking at myself in the mirror every morning due to the beautiful frame. It felt like I was an artwork worthy to be admired. I even thought about putting my signature in the bottom right of the mirror as a joke, like it was a painting. I showed the mirror to my friends, and they were in awe at its beauty, even though they still teased me about my home decor style. But after the first few days, something felt off. Every time I looked at the mirror, it seemed like my reflection was slightly delayed, almost unnoticeable. Sometimes my fingers moved slightly differently, like they were trying to go in a different direction, similar to a bad connection in a video game. I did not think about it much. I told myself that maybe it was connected to my migraine, and my brain was playing tricks on me while having strong headaches. Every morning, I was paying closer attention to my reflection. Sometimes it seemed like my own eyes didn't meet my gaze. Other times my body position was ever so slightly off, but it got worse. One day, I was woken up by my alarm and walked into my bathroom to get ready for work when I froze. My reflection was smiling at me, a wide, maniacal smile with an anticipating gaze. My hands instinctively went up to my face to check if I was actually smiling. I was not. The next days, I dreaded looking in the mirror. I often felt cold sweat on my body when looking in the mirror. It was always smiling. It still mirrored my movements, but it felt half-hearted. I already made up my mind. I was going to throw the mirror away as soon as possible. One morning, I entered the bathroom, my reflection grinning from ear to ear. I lifted my hands to grab the mirror and take it off the wall. Before I could reach the mirror, my reflection lifted its left hand and grabbed my arm. I looked at the mirror, too shocked to even move my fingers. The nails of the reflection dug deep into my skin and started pulling me into the mirror while simultaneously moving its body outwards. I couldn't move. I was looking outside of the mirror, what had been my reflection, before was now a man in his 30s looking at me. He tilted his head. I did too. I had no control over my body. I'd do everything the man outside the mirror did. He gave me a sad smile and said, "I'm sorry." He grabbed the mirror and carried it outside, all while I was horrified and claustrophobic, having no choice but to mirror his every move. He placed the mirror on the sidewalk with a note, "For free." The next hour or so, I often saw passerbys walking by, looking at the mirror, fixing their hair. They did not see me in the mirror. They saw themselves. I tried to tell my brain to more independently, but I only moved when they did. I was imprisoned in a sheet of glass, unsure if I could ever escape. After what felt like an eternity, a young man saw the mirror, looked it up and down, and grabbed it. He carried the mirror 2 streets further east and into a small apartment. He seemed to like the mirror a lot, and placed it inside his bedroom next to a wardrobe. I tried to scream for help, but I could not move a single muscle. I only moved to mirror his body. Over the next days, I watched him try on his outfits, admire himself in the mirror, and fix his hair. I watched his entire daily routine, trapped inside this glass prison. Then, after weeks, when he was trying on a small earring with a glass diamond, I managed to move my finger. It was almost unnoticeable, But I did it. The new owner of the mirror noticed it, blinked a few times, and shrugged. He seemed to think that he imagined it. A wave of happiness flowed through my body. Maybe I could finally escape. Over the next few days, I managed to move more parts of my body, always force to mirror his movements, but always slightly different. He seemed more concerned and confused every time I did it. And one day, the thrill of being able to move again became too big to contain. I smiled. My facial muscles started to obey me again. My smile widened, almost going from ear to ear. The man looked at the mirror, terrified. In his eyes, I saw true fear. He ran out of the room. After he was gone, I noticed that with my facial muscles, most other limbs had started working again. I could move my arms, but when I tried to reach outward, I could only stretch my hands about 30 centimeters outwards, but my head and torso seemed to hit an invisible wall. I was still trapped. It dawned on me that the mirror needed a replacement for me if I wanted to escape. Shortly after, I heard the door. The new owner of the mirror returned. I stopped smiling, mirroring his moves and letting him think that he just imagined my smile in the morning. He came closer, looking slightly nervous, but relieved that his reflection was no longer smiling. 50 centimeters, 40, 30, my right hand shot forward, and I managed to grab his arm. With all strength I had left, I clawed into his arm and pulled him towards me. He screamed, but he did not manage to escape my grasp. I pulled him into the mirror. At the same time, I moved my body outward and broke out of the mirror. We swapped places. I stood outside of the mirror and looked down on my body. I could move freely. I took a step to the right, then to the left. I was finally free. Then it dawned on me. The man, I trapped him inside the mirror. I looked back, saw my own reflection, filled with guilt and shame. "I'm sorry," I whispered. I grabbed the mirror and carried it outside. Using a pen and paper from the man's apartment, I wrote a small note. For free. Story 10. The clapping won't stop. I've never been much of a rule breaker. Predictable. Boring, even. It kept me out of trouble as a kid, at least. A pleasure to have in class. That's how every yellow slip report card described me in looping cursive penmanship, year after year. Of course, neither of my parents ever reacted to the middling praise. A satisfied nod and a steely-edged good was all that could be expected. My brother, 2 years younger, spent most of our adolescent years playing delinquent in stolen cars all over town. My quiet acquiescence and yes sirs were rewarded with the occasional red pen compliment on assignment or a tight smile and a few bucks left on the counter for pizza while my parents went to bail my brother out again. Straight B's were good enough to let me coast through high school graduation, but my experience left me with few real prospects and even fewer friends. The only kid I considered myself close to, we had bonded over our shared tendencies toward acne and unathleticism, moved to the East Coast for college, and despite my best efforts, his text messages had petered out after a couple of months. So, acting on autopilot as my eviction date from my parent home grew closer, I got a job working the night shift at a call center the next town over. The extra pay for working nights made my existence in a sparsely furnished apartment bearable, if not especially comfortable. It was only me working the night support line, so my daily existence went from quiet to invisible. I slept during the day and venture outside only to take the empty bus to work. Exhausted, I grab a sandwich from a 24/7 deli nearby and drive home in the dark, headlights illuminating the emptiness of the roads and sidewalks I passed. Beyond the robotic interactions where I numbly plugged the appropriate script to the odd customer, I floated through life hollow. Invisible to society, I felt a member of only in name. The first time I heard it, I thought someone was mocking me. The day had been shockingly rainy, and as I waited for my bus in the downpour, I was already in a foul mood, doing my best to point my cheap umbrella into the wind. I didn't see the car coming until a wave of cold, muddy water splashed onto me with a shock. The asshole drove off, chrome wheels spinning, water dripping from where he had purposefully driven through the puddle. It wasn't in my nature to be confrontational. Being built like 140 pounds of Play-Doh shaped over a human skeleton will do that to you. But on that day, the freezing dirt clinging to my bottom half snapped something in me, and I fiercely waved my middle finger towards the back of asshole's truck. That was it. Just simply flipping a guy off. Something people do every day, looking for a reaction. But that's when I heard it. The sound of a single pair of hands, clapping. Not a slow clap, like you do sarcastically, but an eager burst of applause. I turned in a frantic circle, searching for whoever had seen my uncharacteristic outburst. It had sounded not 5 feet away, but I saw no one on the glow of the streetlights. Before I could process what had happened any further, my bus pulled up, pneumatic doors opening with a hiss. I'm just tired, I told myself, sitting down, and the lonely night passed uneventfully. When I woke up the next day, I already wanted to hear it again. I had the day off to experiment with it, see what might trigger it again. Was it standing up for myself? I repeated positive affirmations in the mirror and was met with heavy silence. Doing a good job? I cleared my email inbox, but I heard nothing. If you're wondering why I didn't question it further, then you've never been truly alone. I had no friends, barely spoke to my family. Hell, I'd always been the last picked in kickball. The applause had made a small act of rebellion feel special, like I was special. It felt like some form of validation. I didn't care if I was crazy. Other people could decide that if they ever took an interest in my life. Work went on as normal. It had been a few days, and I had written it off as some one-time auditory hallucination. I unlocked the door and went to stash my few belongings in a cubby I shared with the day shift worker who sat in my spot. It wasn't until I started sliding my jacket in that I noticed a lone $50 bill crumpled into the side of the shelf. I froze. I knew it probably, definitely, belonged to Samantha, who worked at less than the salary I did, but with 3 kids to boot. But it wasn't like I was rich, either. I was 19 and barely getting by. I stared at it for a few more seconds before my phone lit up with a rare text message, as if on cue. Samantha, hey, sorry to bother you, but I think some money fell out of my purse earlier in the cubby. Could you check when you can? Thanks. I considered for a brief moment. Too brief. At least she had a family, right? What did I have going on? I waited several minutes before I texted her back. Asterisk no, I don't see it. Sorry, Star. The message sent while I pocketed the bill. And for the second time, I heard the applause, this time an enthusiastic round in eerily perfect harmony, fading after a few minutes into the thin air of the empty office. I sat frozen. I was taken back not only by the surprise of sound, but the spark of curiosity that burned dangerously inside me. I racked my memory. I couldn't think of a time when people had clapped for me. Outside, maybe the polite clapping that comes at birthdays or my graduation. The applause felt genuinely happy for me, like it was proud I was standing up for myself. The next time, I actually wasn't alone. Technically, I had only had one query in the first 6 hours of my shift, but my hopes for a quiet night were shattered when a woman called in with a product complaint. Normally, I'd handle this fairly easily, but this lady seemed out for blood. None of my suggestions, replacement, different model, tech support, refund, seemed placate her, and I honestly didn't know what solution she actually wanted. It comes with a job, right, but after almost 30 minutes of being berated, my composure was nearing its end. Finally, the woman shouted, and I had been holding my headset a good 6 inches away from my E at this point. Well, do you have any suggestions that might actually work? If you want to be treated like a professional, give me some professional advice. I felt a tiny itch in the back of my brain. I wasn't really a professional, but she didn't know that. Actually, no one knew much about me at all. I placed the speaker back up to my mouth. You know what, lady? I do have some professional advice for you. Go F-U-C-K yourself. I hung up the call, heart racing, not waiting for a reaction. But I got one. From nowhere, a deep, thunderous applause erupted from the air around me, like a standing ovation for a well-loved soloist. The percussion swept through my body in the warmest, most gentle of ways. I loved it. I craved the sound. After that, I figured out the rules pretty quickly. The applause, the audience, as I grew to think of it, liked risk. It didn't even have end in consequences. I never did hear from my manger about the customer I swore at, but the more risk, the louder it was and the better it felt. But there was only so much I could risk. It's not like my life was worth much gambling with anyways. The next day, I sought to experiment. What risk equaled what reward, so to say. But I chickened out of every thought that popped into my mind. I didn't want to seriously hurt anyone or risk serious jail time. I guess I still had some self-control left at that point. I settled for pulling on the car doors I encountered on my way to the bus stop that evening. It was enough for some light celebration, scattered applause sparking in my ears, but I knew I could do better. As I rode the bus quietly, faint shadows skittered in the corners of my vision. At home, the emptiness of the air around me was suffocating. I didn't dare try the card trick of the sun coming up, and the usual knot in my chest tensed with every pulse in my throbbing head. Frustrated and unable to sleep, I decided to give my apartment a deep clean. It needed it, if nothing else. The stillness echoed in my ears as I scrubbed the stovetop to a sparking polish, turning the electric stovetop on low to help me scrape off the residue of poorly placed Tupperware I knew my landlord would kill me for. The silence was a restless force, and suddenly I felt a demented, delightful pull toward a thing that every cell in my body knew not to touch. I know I wasn't thinking rationally then, but I remember thinking it's not that hot, it probably won't even scar. Dumb fuck. It was blistered for weeks. But the moment I placed my open palm on a hot stove, the searing pain was instantly accompanied by a chorus of raucous applause, the sensory input twisting madly through my brain in a symphony of warmth and invitation, even as I could smell my own burning flesh. From then on, silence became my active enemy, causing something inside me twist unbearably, impatient, desperate to be seen. Without my audience rewarding me, the air was thicker, colors were wrong, and shadows too deep. It became impossible for me to eat or sleep. But the audience liked that, too. Good job. You're doing so well. This is the way. The words weren't spoken, but they pulsed through my brain to the rhythm of invisible hands. I stopped going to work. It turns out being threatened with eviction isn't so bad when every angry call from my landlord triggered another explosive round of applause that gave me more satisfaction than that shitty apartment ever could. I knew it wasn't going to be enough forever, though when every balance on a knife's edge is met with an adoring crowd, I was about to step off no matter how many times I fell and cut my feet. Not that cutting feet bothers me now. There's a few of my toes swirling around the bathtub drain. The risk of blood loss and infection is intoxicating for me and my audience. A while back, my body started moving in time with the applause. At first it was a finger tapping, a foot bouncing, but as the rhythm overtakes my being, I feel myself thinning into a single beat among many, eyes blinking and breath catching the same rising swell. I didn't decide to do it. I don't know when it started, and now that I've noticed, there's a fragment of identity that screams to stop, but it feels too good not to follow, even if I have a choice. The instant I fall into their rhythm, I know I will feel the last of me slip, making space for whatever will follow. Some part of me is already lifting away, unraveling into the echo that will outlive the person I was. And I will give myself into the terrible beat, hands folded and upright, waiting to give the next lonesome person a taste of the warmth that will never stay.